This is Recruiters on the Rise, and I'm Colleen Gallagher. Join me for candid conversations with talent leaders as we explore the work that drives them, the lessons they've learned, and how they're helping people find careers they love. The show is sponsored by Lavalier, an interview intelligence platform built by Textio. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another exciting episode of Recruiters on the Rise. I'm so excited to have our guest today. He has over 20 years of experience building talent and HR function in industries a lot of recruiters may never touch. He spent 6 years as a staff accountant at Wawa before pivoting into recruiting, and we'll learn a little bit more about that transition. He's also a self-described meme enthusiast who believes you can't survive in HR without a sense of humor. Um, and he quotes Christmas Vacation in team meetings to prove it. In his current role, he's taken on a really big talent challenge, working at a shipyard in Philadelphia that was just recently featured on 60 Minutes. And we'll talk a little bit about the growth and everything going on there and some of the challenges related to that, building out that workforce and trying to increase volume there. So he's currently the Director of Talent Acquisition and Workforce Development at Hanwha Philly Shipyard. Pedro Velis, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for that nice introduction.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you here. All right. So the first question I like to ask my guests, what's the one thing or one action that sets the best recruiters apart from the rest?
Great question. That's a good starter. I've always believed that you, as any talent acquisition professional, you have to learn your business, like what we do, how do we make money, so in this case, how do we build ships and all the critical processes in that, and because that allows you to understand all the key components, all the key jobs that are in there, and so building the relationships with your leaders to help you understand that business, or in that case, that business. And so whether that's in operations, whether that's in maintenance or supply chain or finance, understanding how their jobs impact the bigger picture. And then how do we make money, right? I mean, that's what it comes down to. And so I think that was kind of put into my head early in the career, is like, you can go recruit for a job, but if you don't fundamentally understand what that job is or how that function works and operates within the other departments, you're just going to fill a seat, and that seat may turn over, and you're not going to make the type of impact for the organization.
Yeah, it's so important, I think. I guess I often see it as like you have a recruiter who's coming in as the subject matter expert on hiring, but you have a hiring manager who's a subject matter expert in the function and what they're doing. And so I think if you can have a conversation or find the way to bring the best of those things together, and often it's learning a little bit more with some depth around, you know, what's really going to resonate with the hiring manager. And I think getting to know the business and the economics and sort of the drivers behind it are really important. And so I'm curious, like when you think about coaching recruiters or hiring recruiters onto your team, like how do you assess for something like that?
So, I think my overall philosophy around just talent within the talent acquisition space, I try to have a diverse group of talent. I don't want people that have my same background, right? We all have. So I look for, at the end of the day, is your smarts, your brain, right? I'm looking for talent in that sense, right? So I'll give you an example. I hired a young lady last year who started her career as an elementary education right and teacher, and she did it for a couple of years and then decided that wasn't for me, right? And so she pivoted and took her career and decided to get her online master's in HR. Had never recruited, but I knew going in that she had a capacity to learn. I also looked at the job knowing that what the majority of the work she was going to be doing was working with high schools and technical trade. And so making that connection to say, you kind of know the education side, you know what these students are like. I can teach you recruiting. Recruiting at the end of the day, it's a people business. It's a soft skill business. It's right, and making those connections. And so I find that sometimes finding maybe that non-traditional person is sometimes your best recruiter. I have another gentleman on my team who, again, I was not able to hire because he's been with the shipyard for 25 years. He started his career as a carpenter and became a shipbuilder, became a supervisor, and worked in the health and safety. And about 3 years ago, became a recruiter. And what he brings is the technical expertise, right? He's teaching me how we build ships, right? Which is what I value. And so when you surround yourself with people that bring you a little bit of a different expertise, that's what makes, I think, a talented team.
Yeah. I guess transitioning a little bit more to, the industry that you're in right now. Um, I think you said 75% of your workforce is skilled trades. So that would include like welders, pipe fitters, the people who are physically building the ships. Like, how is recruiting for those roles different versus, some of the more traditional roles that people think about, recruiting, technology, product, sales?
So the scary part that we face today is that there is a massive shortage of welding talent, or it's just shipbuilding trade talent. There is I think the Department of Defense/War is estimating that there is about 175,000 skilled worker shortage that's coming in the next 10 years. We just don't have enough skilled workers to build ships. So you start with that. And you start with that to, welders. When I think about welders, it's about time under the hood and practice. So there are great schools out there that teach folks that, but they still need the hands-on learning and the training. And then so what's that? You have this delicate balance between making production and honing your craft. One thing I've learned is, at least in our area, and I think this is across I think the US, right? There's a lot of unoccupied welding booths, and that's just a lost opportunity. While there has been an increase over the last few years of more folks going into skilled trades, quite frankly, we need a bigger push. And I think that starts earlier, whether that's at the middle school or even at the high school, to get more folks to understand that a trade job isn't this dirty job, or isn't this, an afterthought of a career, but it's actually a career that can give you not only very viable wages, but it can launch you into other careers. And I go back to my recruiter. He started like that. That was his trade, and he's evolved over time. So what worries me more than anything else is, how do I go out and find this talent and get them skilled up in a shipyard that still has to produce, and we still have to meet our production numbers. And in the shipbuilding world, it's just practice, 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 and it takes hours and hours and hours of it.
Yeah. So this is, this, I think, speaks to your workforce development sort of part of your role. And I think it was talked about in the 60 Minutes story. For those who haven't read it, I think it talks a little bit about or watched it. Hanwha obviously is a global company and also builds ships in other parts of the world. And so there are other parts of the world where there are pretty robust training programs where you can scale, you can put people into those training programs. And I think it has a much higher volume capacity. So how are you thinking about building that out? Is that a partnering with a trade institution or a school, or are you all looking at developing that more robustly in-house?
So I think it's a multi-pronged approach, or a multi-channel approach. So we do have an apprenticeship program. It's a 3-year program, and currently we are able to produce about 120 apprentices a year. We are investing as a company to build a brand new training academy, which will allow us to increase that from, like I said, about 100 to 300 to potentially 500 apprentices. So that's one pipeline that we're looking at. But that's only one solution. And what we're looking at is other solutions, which is, to your point, we are starting to partner with trade schools and tech schools. I think that is, quite frankly, become my number one job responsibility, um, and making the connections. And there's a school here locally in Philadelphia that is willing to take on our curriculum, our training curriculum, and teach that curriculum at their school to help produce the welding talent we need. I am speaking with other organizations who have welding booths. Steam Fitters 420 here in Philadelphia, they have an apprentice program, but they have welding booths that sit idle. And so trying to connect them with another workforce development partner that could potentially have um, folks interested in welding, getting grant funding and making these connections between the ecosystem, where everybody is making I think this has the same goal, which is to increase just the skills talent. That becomes my number one goal. While I want to hire just for myself, the reality is we have to, as at least a Philadelphia region, and maybe, as obviously as a country, we have to partner together to find those opportunities between partners, between schools, and help develop that talent.
Yeah, and I think right now when there is a lot of fear around like what AI is going to do to some more traditional tech roles or finance or things like that, it's, you know, good to know because I think your point is totally accurate. Like I remember going through high school, right? And you didn't hear a lot about these types of opportunities, but they can be very um I don't lucrative might not be the right word, but like it does have a higher level of wage than I think people understand.
Yeah, I mean, I will brag a little bit about our apprenticeship program. It's a 3-year program. When you graduate from it, you have 22 college credits, right? So you're close to an associate's degree. You're making somewhere between 35 to 40 bucks an hour. So now you're looking at $80,000 without overtime, which we all know in manufacturing, there's typically some sort of overtime. So you could be making six figures. Again, if you're a high school student and that's where you start your career, and now you're 21, you're not burdened with any college debt. And I think that's part of this selling point. But I think what people don't realize is like electricians and welders, they command a high dollar. There are traveling welders and pipe fitters and electricians who are making, 75 to $100 an hour, making 200, $300,000, especially with this surge of data centers. And that's the reality. I will go back to something you said about AI. I was driving out to Harrisburg about a month ago, and I think, do you know who Mike Rowe is?
Oh, dirty jobs. Yeah, yeah.
And he had this billboard, and it says like, AI is not coming for your jobs. And it was a welder, right? And that's the truth, right? These are jobs. Now, these can be tough jobs, right? And they're not for everybody, but there's a good portion of people out there that's what they like to do. They want to work with their hands. They want to be out there. We just have to show them that's their career. And I think part of my job is to also educate people that your career doesn't just end at being a welder. There's other things that you can do beyond that. That is a skill set that no one can ever take away from you, right? No matter what happens. And I think you can add on to that, whether you become a trainer, whether you become a supervisor or a foreman, or you go work in safety or wherever that is, you become an engineer, right? That tool will always be with you. That is the key message that I'm trying to get out there to folks.
Yeah. Um, so I know one thing you and I had talked about is and I think again, not to reference the story too much, but it was very informative. I think in the 60 Minutes piece, it talked also about how we're looking as a country to expand capacity in terms of shipbuilding. And, you're expecting some growth in terms of your workforce because you're looking to increase production volume. So can you talk a little bit more about like what does that growth actually look like? Like where now, what are you hoping to get to?
Yeah. So you mentioned, so we build right now about 1.5 ships a year. We have about 2,000 employees. So to give everybody context, right? The U.S. lags when it comes to shipbuilding, especially in the commercial side. So on the commercial side, which is currently what we build, build, container ships and tankers out, those are the majority of our ships. In the US, we build 0.1% of all the global ships. China makes about 55%. Korea makes about 35% of all the ships. So we are Korean owned. Hanwha is a Korean company. They build ships over there. And so they're bringing their expertise. Our hope and our goal is to eventually get somewhere between 10 to 20 ships a year. And that will come through, obviously, we are revitalizing our shipyard. There is a $5 billion, up to a $5 billion capital investment coming to modernize our shipyard. From a people perspective, what does that mean? We will grow somewhere between, and the numbers change a little bit every here and there, but somewhere between, 5 to 8,000, maybe 10,000. It just depends, right? The more ships you build, the more people you need. And a good portion of them will be trades, because that's where what takes. But we will be adding across everything. Engineering, you'll need more engineers. You need more, supply chain. You need more HR people, more recruiters. It's an exciting time, quite frankly. It's a little nerve wracking because that kind of growth hasn't been seen, at least in our industry, in decades. And so, it's coming. And I'm fortunate that I can see that coming and preparing, but we can prepare as much as I want. But until that, the demand is there, the demand signal hits, it is, it's quite, it keeps me up to sleep. I know it keeps our CEO, David Kim, up at night as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's, I guess to your point, nerve wracking and exciting at the same time, but it's nice to hear about opportunities that are offering a lot of growth and job growth right now because the headlines are also so negative. And I think that's the thing that gets sort of mired in some of the pieces that are splashier headlines, right? Obviously, it's very, I know I'm based in San Francisco and being out here, like a lot of people are being impacted with layoffs and things like that. And you sort of see jobs numbers that's still, showing some robustness. And there's just a lot of different puts and takes, between industries and everything. And so I'm sure it's exciting and fun to be able to, it sounds hard in terms of like what you're looking for. And obviously there's not just a bunch of, welders, like you said, just waiting for jobs, and you have to do a lot more background to create that. But I think it's nice to hear about, opportunities for growth right now.
Yeah. And I will say that we are, I think, in a very unique position, at least as a shipbuilder. There's only two shipyards in the Philadelphia, in the US that are in urban markets, right? Us, and there's a shipyard in San Diego. The rest are in these, what I would say, for a little bit further away towns, right? And so I can draw upon a fairly large metropolis here, right? I've got Jersey right next to me, Delaware, right? The Philadelphia marketplace is a great location. And I think that's probably the one, if I was somewhere, in the middle of the country where maybe there was a lack of talent to pull from, that would make me a little bit more nervous. But I think Philadelphia, we're a blue collar town, right? We're gritty at the end of the day. So these types of jobs appeal to a lot of folks. We can draw upon from a very large area.
Yeah. Transitioning a little bit, you I think we're sharing that this summer you've been doing some work with your intern program, and we were talking a little bit about you know what that looks like, and we're hearing a lot in the news around it being a very challenging market for folks that are coming out of college. So I'm curious, like what are you hearing from your intern population, or do you do any on-campus hiring, and what are you seeing there? So sorry, that's a very loaded. There's a bunch of questions in there, so can revisit.
Yeah. So, and I'll do my best to, answer it all. So, when our interns started, we asked them a couple questions. One was, how many jobs they applied to, and then how many offers did they get? And majority of my interns received only one offer, which was from us. And we were late in the game. Let me go back. We didn't start our recruitment until February, which in the college world for interns, that's late in the game. Um, and then when it came to a number of jobs they applied to, some of them applied to hundreds of jobs. And these are, we're hiring engineers from some top-notch universities and, supply chain students. We were fortunate this year because we had what I would say a very strong depth of pool of applicants for our internship program. We saw also a fair amount of students who were graduating from college who did not have were looking for an internship because maybe they didn't have an internship while they were in undergrad. And so, you know, I- we're in a kind of a unique spot because we are this was our first intern class. We had used co-ops in the past, and we will continue to use co-ops to supplement talent. But when I think about this intern program, you are pulling from you know a lot of schools because there are some majors that we pull that unfortunately in Philadelphia we don't have. So like naval architecture or marine or ocean engineering, those programs don't exist in Philly. So we have to pull from that from those programs. And so as we what I did we're also seeing is we are seeing a lot of college kids post graduation applying to our jobs. We recently filled 3 positions, entry level jobs with recent college engineer graduates, which you know 3, 4 years ago, that I don't know if that would have been easy. These are really great students who I think we just got lucky. I think we are in an advantageous space. I also know I'm realistic that not everybody knows that there's a great career in the shipyard industry or in the shipbuilding industry. And I think that is something that I think students are waking up to. Maybe they realize maybe, AI isn't maybe working in other sectors that maybe are seeing some of this churn. Maybe that's turn them off. There's a lot of stability in what we can offer, and there's going to be a lot of growth that comes with that for all types of jobs, not just college students.
Yeah, I mean to your point, it's a really good opportunity for some folks. I feel like, obviously I haven't been involved in campus recruiting um for a long time, but when I was in consulting, that was a huge source. We did a lot of hiring. Um, we sort of did the on the job training for folks, and it was really concentrated with the big four and a lot of consulting firms and pharma. And to the extent that those uh, employers that used to fill a lot of the demand have scaled back a little bit, it is a really good opportunity for companies that might not have been on people's radars a couple years ago, um, and offers just a really unique experience.
It does. And I also so this upcoming fall, we're going to be, but I think between 12 and 14 colleges, campuses, where I will tell you where the competition right now are these tech and trade schools. So Williamson School of Trades, which is in media, tremendous schools, got about 250, 300 students practicing trades at a 3-year college. Um, Thaddeus Stevens out in Lancaster, it's a 2-year trade school, and then Penn College of Technology out in Williamsport, which offers both a 2 and a 4-year trade. Those kids, they're walking. I mean, they are in such demand. A class may have 200 to 300 graduates. It's like when I think of Thaddeus Stevens, and those kids are getting 15, 20 offers, right? So the competition for that is enormous. And so we've been fortunate. We were able to pull some kids from Thaddeus Stevens for internships this summer and from Williamson. And we're going to start building more of my efforts will be at these tech schools and these trade schools, again, to fill some of my, welding talent. But those are all future leaders in my mind, right? They become great workers who become great potential supervisors or whatever that is. So, but that's where the demand is, and that's where I'm seeing it, which is interesting.
I guess I'm curious to learn a little bit more about you and your path to being in recruiting. So you spent, I think it was 6 years as an accountant at Wawa, and now you're at, Hanwha doing TA and workforce development. So how did you go from being an accountant to what you're doing now?
I, you know, well, what recruiter ever goes to college and says that's what I want to do? I don't think that's very, very rare. So I joke that I had a quarter life crisis at 26, 27, where I was like, I don't think this is what I want to do for the rest of my life, right? And nothing against accounting, and it's great, it's stable and all that stuff, but I knew at at my core, I want to do something salesy, right? I want to do something with people. I just didn't know what that was, and I got recruited by a recruiter to be a recruiter, which I think the majority of us who then take an opportunity to go be. I went into agency, and I spent about 5 years being a external recruiter headhunter, right? And that's where I say I started cutting my teeth, and where what's unique about being an agency is it's the one place where you're expected to make 50 dials, right? It is a fundamentally different mindset than going into corporate, because that job becomes holistically different, right? If you make 50 dials a day, that's just not possible, right? But that's what the job was. So it allowed me to start finding my voice and finding my confidence and learning how to recruit and talk to people. And then eventually I transitioned into a traditional corporate role. And that's where I think I was starting to hone in on, oh, wow, this is something that's very interesting. There's a strategic side to this, right? When you sit on the agency side, I always joke, a client gives you like our salary range is 70, 80, and then you go out and you tell the client, well, that's not going to pay market. And then they tell you things like, well, we have, comp compression or internal equity issues. And as an external recruiter, you're like, well, what does that mean? That doesn't matter to me. I'm telling you that here's the person I can find you. And so when you go inside, you start learning all the kind of the insides of how organizations work. And so, over the course of my career, I have balance both. I've sat in a talent acquisition lead spot, but I also had the opportunity to sit on the HR business partner side. And that's given me a different perspective and allowed me to learn kind of the ins and outs of being a true HR professional and dealing and translating the skills of a recruiter to an HR business partner. Because selfishly, I think we are very similar in a lot of ways. When you're interviewing a candidate versus doing an interview of an employee relations, it's the same thing, right? How do you get to that end goal? What are you trying to figure out? It's the same skill set, and so I've hovered over both lines, and people ask me what I love the most, and I quite frankly, it's always been recruiting. That's who I am at my core. I recruit when I'm not even recruiting. You know, I think that's in my DNA. I joke I was at lunch a couple weeks ago and I was sitting next to a Warren professor of finance, and he said to me, "We build ships in Philadelphia." And I said, "Yes, sir. We've been building ships in Philadelphia for a very, very long time." And he only works 10, 15 minutes from the shipyard. So I educated him and I said, "Well, tell me about what you do and your students and stuff like that." So you educate them and then you ask them about them. And I think that to me is what I love about being in this space. It's it's just fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm learning so much through this conversation. It's so interesting, and I agree with you. I love hearing new stories. Getting to talk to folks, even with this podcast, is really just a fun thing. So that resonates a lot with me in terms of being able to chat with and meet a lot of new folks. I know I was looking at your experience, and one of the things I wanted to ask you about that I think people would be interested in is, I think, at Bonduelle. Am I saying that right?
Fun. Well, yeah.
You had quite a large team there, and I think one of the things you called out was that there was a pretty massive reduction in turnover there. And this is a food manufacturing operation for folks that don't know. How did you do that? What was driving it initially? How did you change it? What did you measure? How has that impacted what you've done going forward?
So, I worked at this food manufacturing plant in New Jersey. I was a senior HR manager there, and what they make is the salads in a cold environment. It's 34 degrees. It's manual labor intensive work. Right. I mean, 34 degrees in the summer sounds great. Um, but doing that every day, 10 hours a day, standing on your feet, it's not so great. And we at that time leveraged a fair amount of contingent workers coming in, right? And it was really kind of a trial by fire. There was no onboarding. There was very limited training. It was like you just go on the line and you have to learn. And while as simple as that job seems to be, there is kind of an art to it or a science, and there's training. And so, my plant director, he was like, he once said, Pedro, I need 20 people a week. And if we keep one person, that's a good thing. I said, well, Matt, that doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm like, how about we hire 20 people in a week and we keep, I don't know, 15 of them
Yeah.
instead of 20 every day. Right. And take the time, slow down the process. And I understand that from a production perspective, you have to be staffed. But the amount of labor that you're spending for that 1 day or 2 day of that person being there, you still have to pay for it. And so, working with my operational leaders to understand, okay, what does training look like? What is successful? Getting them involved. So working with my staffing partners and saying, what is the right type of candidate that should be working here? What is it that, what does the process look like when you recruit them? Are you actually bringing them into the cold environment, right? Telling them that it's going to be cold versus having them stand in that area for 15 minutes while you're talking about what you could be doing. It's two different things. It was simple as people would show up not having enough warm clothes on their first day. So having like, this is what you need to be wearing for your first day. And then over time, having them throughout that first week, not spend just 10 hours in the cold, some of it being classroom training, right? Having a buddy system in place to, show them around, giving them a couple extra breaks so they can acclimate ultimately to it. This wasn't solely just done by myself. I think what I'd say is I had to partner with my staffing partners, with my operational leaders, with my HR folks who work with me to find the right solutions to help us reduce that turnover. And we did. And I think, sometimes I think we're in such a rush to fill a seat that we forget that this is still something new for someone, and their expectations are. We have to temper back our expectations as managers, as leaders, and understand that we have to meet our production goals. But if you have turnover that's 150%, 200%, you're never going to get staff. And that's the goal, right? You have to stop the turnover.
The thing I love about that example is it makes so much sense in the context of everything we've talked about around, like, particularly around you saying, recruiting and being an HRBP, because I'm hearing elements of both of those things and what you're talking about. It's like having the strategic, or the intake meeting, really understanding the requirements, making sure it's very clear to the candidate what they need to do, making sure you do the onboarding and making sure they're successful. And it's sort of like quality over quantity thing that is, sort of the ultimate goal, I think, of any type of hiring that you're doing. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I when I was, early in my career, had to do when I worked in consulting, and a lot of what we did was similar to some of the audit procedures, even though we weren't auditors. But one of our clients was Harry and David, the manufacturer, the gift baskets, but they had, frozen storage, and I had to go in there and do an inventory count. And like I walk in, and the person I'm meeting with, like, I'm there with my sheet of paper, because we still were writing things down on actual paper back then. And he like hands me a pencil, and I'm like, what does he do? Well, the ink in the pen freezes when you go into these cold storage. And so you need to write things down with a pencil. It's like so simple, but somebody might not think about stuff like that. It was like, okay, you need it, so to your point, you need to get people a little bit more used to and think about some of those things you might not think about, like making sure you have warm enough clothes, or, your pen's not going to work when it's, below freezing or close to freezing in a refrigerated space. So yeah. One question I like to ask my guests too is about sort of, what advice you would give to yourself, the day after graduation, knowing what you know now, what's some advice you would give yourself?
Besides buy Apple stock and Microsoft stock.
Yeah.
So when I think about my career, um, there's no such thing as a linear path, right? And um, when I think I've learned that I've had a lot of confidence in myself, and I've in the sense of I'm not afraid to fail. And that has allowed me, I think earlier in my career, like when I was thinking about leaving, I probably should have left my job earlier than I did, quite frankly. The last couple years I knew I was unhappy and I was afraid, right? I was afraid, but then over time I'm learning you've got to take a chance on yourself and not be afraid, right? Don't be afraid to fail. And I think over time I've become comfortable in that space, feeling that I'm capable enough. I'll figure it out. And so that's allowed for me as I've grown through my career. Like went to work at Timken, I started as a manager in university relations, and then they moved me to New Hampshire to go be an HR business partner, and wasn't even a lateral move, right? It was quite frankly, I became from being a manager to an individual contributor to go back, to take a step back. But I saw what the end goal was, which was I wanted to be again another leader at some point. And it may take me 2 years, it may take me 3 years or 4 years, but I felt comfortable enough in that space to know I could do it. And that was something that I think people need to understand is sometimes it's okay to take a step back, to launch yourself forward. Go learn, right? Never stop learning. Um, and take that moment to appreciate that. And the analogy I think I always share with people is like, we always talk about, I'm not an expert or anything, right? I'm a master of none or whatever whatever that role. But I have I consider myself having the Batman utility belt, right? I can do a little bit of everything, right? I take what I started. Yes, like I did finance and accounting 30s, geez, a long time ago, I'll say. Um, but that gave me, I understood how to read a P&L statement and how to do, budgeting and understand finances and understanding cost. And that has allowed me, I took that skill set and, I've done comp analysis because of that. When I worked, when I was at AmerisourceBergen, they gave me an opportunity to get some comp experience, and same thing at Bondwell. And so, right, having that financial background. And so I think don't just look at yourself and saying, this is I'm a one trick pony. I rather develop yourself to have a little bit of everything. You don't have to be the greatest at everything. I tell my team, I'm not the greatest recruiter. And I know that. I'm not the smartest person in the room, and I never will be the smartest person in the room. But what I can offer is I can give you a little bit of everything. I can be that utility player that allows you to I can have an intelligent conversation around comp strategy. Am I gonna go out and develop that for you? But I can talk to you about it and understand it. I have that base. I know how to conduct employee relations and understand how that needs to be done and give you enough of guidance as a leader. And so to me, that's the advice I give myself today is, you know, even whatever years ago is don't be afraid to fail and have the confidence in yourself to make those moves.
I think you know more about all that stuff than you might give yourself credit for from what I've heard you say, but I love the spirit. I couldn't agree more, and I think that's really sage advice. Um, well, thank you so much for being on the show. Like I said, this is such a good education, and for someone who sometimes can feel a little stuck in the tech bubble here on the West Coast, it's really nice to learn a little bit more about what's going on. And even though I'm not a fan of any Philly sports teams, I do like the city itself. So it was great talking to you today. I really appreciate you joining.
I'm also not much of a Philly sports fan, but that's okay. But we'll keep that under claw.
Anybody? Yeah, you can't say that out loud in Philly.
I do root for the Phillies. I'll say that. We'll end up with that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to connect with you?
Just on LinkedIn, quite honestly, that's I'm on there fairly often. I think that's the simplest platform. I don't do much more other social media beyond that right now in my life.
Well, Pedro, thank you again so much for joining. This has been another exciting episode of Recruiters on the Rise. If you learned something today or found or enjoyed listening to this, please tell a friend. And thank you again for Pedro for joining and everyone else for listening.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And that wraps up another episode. Thank you for joining. For show notes and other episodes, visit us at recruitersontherise.com. Recruiters on the Rise is sponsored by Lavalier, an interview intelligence platform. Lavalier goes beyond basic note takers to improve your ability to assess candidates with AI-powered interview questions, summaries, and transcription. With Lavalier, you can finally hire with speed and confidence.